Hello everybody and welcome or welcome back to the second shelf and to another recent reads on Sunday. And this one and probably also the next one next Sunday, those recent reads will be heavy on the 1001 books by women I have to read before I die, because I need to do some catch up. I've told you, if you follow my channel, I've mentioned that in a video, I think a week or maybe 2 weeks ago, that I've kind of a little bit fallen off the wagon with this project of mine. By the way, if you're interested in my list of 1001 books that I have to read, all by women, fiction and non-fiction, I will leave a link to the Goodreads shelf down in the description box. But anyway, I've read the BookTube Prize, I have read the long list for the Women's Prize, and that meant that other projects had to take a back seat, and one of them was the 1001 women. And also, I also told you I'm not going to work with TBRs anymore. It's just not working for me. I get so like one of the subscribers told me whenever she makes a TBR and she looks at those books, she feels like those books are tainted. And yeah, I have the same thing. So no more TBRs. But anyway, what did I read the last couple of weeks? One book that I finished was a buddy read with Kathleen from Kathleen Ann, and we are doing feminist reading together, and we read Angela Saini's new book, The Patriarchs, How Men Came to Rule. Yeah, like this, which was published just earlier this year, I think in February. But yeah, a couple of months ago. Angela Saini. I have difficulties. I'm sorry, Angela. I will call you Angela. Somehow my mouth can't wrap herself around that last name. I'm so stupid. Anyway, so she is a science journalist. I read previous books by her, also about feminism, inferior, superior, about racism, feminism. And this book is what it says on the tin. She tries to tackle the origins of patriarchal rule. And she goes, of course, in history, but she also, it's more theme oriented. So can you see this? Yeah, sort of, kind of. Those are the chapter headings. I thought the book was really interesting because the main message that I took away from it is that obviously things are more complicated than we think. That patriarchal rules are not as natural as we feel. She also explores, our nearest relatives in the animal kingdom, bonobos, chimpanzees. So it's not as ubiquitous as we think it is, because often it's called like the natural order, and just look at the other animals, in the animal kingdoms, they are all ruled by the alpha male, and that's just not true. But it's also not true when we look at humans. There are still pockets of resistance, so to speak, of societies or groups that are not patriarchal, even in the 21st century. So she gives me this idea that the rule is not, this is the natural order of things, and of course we have to fight it because it's unjust, and because even if it were the natural order, it wouldn't make it just. But it's really interesting to look at our perception of the past, for instance, how we interpret the past, especially Homo sapiens past, where we don't have any written records, and we assume automatically that people lived in the same way and organized their society in the same way we did. And she comes with cases and evidence, archaeological, but also the new DNA, when there was a grave discovered in the Viking time. I mean, it was not discovered in the Viking time, but the grave was from the Viking time, and the dead body was adorned with weapons. Everybody assumed this is a Viking warrior. Turned out in 2017, the DNA was female. So what she didn't do, I have some criticism, is she does not really answer the question how men came to rule. I expect, suspect, that's the right word. I was just thinking there's something wrong. I suspect that this is something that the publisher thought as, you know, clickbait, teasy. She just, which is fine. She explores patriarchy and that our history is more complicated than just say, well, look at all the animals. They are all ruled by males and so are all the humans. Or it had been like the beginning of time, and that's just not true. So it's certainly interesting, but don't get too hung up on the, you know, on the subtitle, because that is not really what she is answering. And sometimes I also have to say she has not the most succinct way of describing stuff, but it's worth it. It's still worth it. Okay, there's another book I read for the 1001 Women, and that is the classic of last month, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, Iola Leroy. This is one of the 12 classics that I want to read this year. So it's the one for April. And I will leave the link to my review video down below. I'm just going to tell you this was published in 1892, and it is the account of Iola Leroy around the Civil War in the US, a little bit before, a little bit after, and she was the daughter of a plantation owner, but and she had very fair skin, but it turned out that her heritage was black, and how her life developed from that. It was really interesting to read something from that time, 1892, that was focusing on that issue of quote unquote passing. So, but if you want to hear more, check out my review. And then I read a book with JoSmith, who doesn't have a channel, but who comments on a lot of our videos. And I'm always excited when I buddy read with her. And we read this modern classic, Attia Hosain, Sunlit on a Broken Column. Attia Hosain is an Indian, or was an Indian author of the beginning of the 20th century. She was born in 1913. She also lived in the UK, but she writes about India. And this book is set in India in the 1920s, beginning 1930s, and it goes all the way up to after the Second World War and partition. So it ends in the early 1950s. The main focus of the book is Layla, an orphan daughter of a distinguished Muslim family. And she is brought up in her grandfather's home, and then the grandfather dies. That's not a spoiler, by the way. The book opens with the fact that the grandfather is dying. It takes a while then in the book until he's dead, but her life, she is about 12 or something when the book opens, and then what happens in this very traditional Muslim family where they observe purda for women. That means women are sequestered in a certain part of the house. They don't leave the house. They don't meet with men. But it's really interesting how she talks about this for me, very different way of living, because one of the women, her aunt, when the grandfather is so ill, she runs the grandfather's business. She still can't meet men face to face, so they have to meet with a curtain between, but she runs the business. So it's much more complex than just to say, well, these women, I mean, not that I'm in favor of sequestering anybody, but it's not as simple as saying, well, those poor women and they have no agency at all. So I loved the complexity. I loved the characters. It was focused on women. the women of the household, even though the society is definitely ruled by men. And the way society was changing, tensions were rising, obviously, in the 1920s and 30s. In India, Mahatma Gandhi is not mentioned, but the student uprising and the fundamental changes that society will go through are definitely the sort of undercurrent in the book. I really, really enjoyed reading this. I learned a lot. It was really beautifully written. There's this very slow pace of the reflecting back the slow pace of the society back then. So yeah, if you have never read this, I can certainly recommend it. So those were the books, are the books that I've finished. I'm almost done with another buddy read with Heidi from my reading life. We are reading Femina, the glaring cover, Femina by Janina Ramirez, published in 2022. And this is, it says in the subtitle, it's a history, the subtitle reads, A New History of the Middle Ages through the Women Written Out of It. So it is all about the Middle Ages. It's 8 or 9 chapters looking at different Western, I have to say, it's focusing on Western society in the Middle Ages. The warrior woman that I just mentioned in when I was talking about the patriarchs, the Birka warrior, because the grave was discovered in Birka in Sweden, is of course featuring, but also other women. Some of them I knew, like Hildegard von Bingen. She was a Renaissance woman, so to speak, a scholar, artist, mystic, but most of them I had never heard of. So I'm, it's really interesting, and I will talk more about it once I've had my check-in with Heidi, which will happen later today because she should be the first one to hear what I feel when I finish the book. So I will come back to that next week. And another buddy read is also again with Kathleen. After we finished the Patriarchs, we picked up this one, The Hidden Face of Eve by Nawal El-Saadawi, published in this, it was translated, sorry, I have to tell you that, of course, translated by Sharif Hetata from the Arabic, and the English translation was first published in 1980, and the original in Egypt in 1977. Nawal El-Saadawi died not that long ago, and she was one of the most eminent feminist scholars, doctors of Egypt, of Egyptian descent. So you probably have heard of her. She wrote also fiction, memoirs, and this is her account of the position and the position in society of women in Arab countries, focusing, of course, on Egypt. So she gives the history of Egypt, for instance, Egyptian ancient history, but it's broader than just looking at, you know, the veil, for instance. She also talks about the difference between women who were raised in Western countries and as opposed to Arab countries. Of course, she talks about female genital mutilation, the veil, but it's also, excuse me, it's also looking at, even before the word intersectionality was a common term, she definitely looks at the connection between economic issues and the position of women. We are about halfway, so it's not an easy read, and the publishing, the way it's published, I really hate it, and there's a typo on the very first page. So whatever this publishing house, Z Books by Bloomsbury, you didn't do a very good job, given the fact that this is such a an important author, but yeah. And I'm started Steve Donoghue's pick for his read-along, his book club. And this month in May, we are reading this one, The Letters of Elizabeth Bishop, edited by Robert Giroux. And it's not all her letters because she wrote obviously thousands of them. It's a selection, but it covers her whole life from or not her whole life. I mean, she didn't write when she was 1 year old, but when she started in, college, all the way up until her death. And Elizabeth Bishop, of course, was a very famous U.S. American poet, and I love reading letters. So I'm have to do a little reading today, definitely another 50 pages or so, to have covered the first fourth, because Steve always divides the book into 4 parts. So each week we read 1/4 of the book, and I'm not there yet, but I really, really enjoy it. I have to say, I'm just going to put this down because this is so heavy. I have to say, there are some explanations in the letter. So for instance, if at the beginning, when she writes a letter to Franny, it's explained who that is once, but you have to remember that because it's not going to be repeated after. And in the letter, if she writes a letter to somebody else and referencing Franny, then the last name or an explanation will be in parentheses. But for the rest, there is very little context. So it's not like you would have oftentimes when I read letters, for instance, Sylvia Plath's letters or diaries, it's more her diaries, you have an extensive note portion in the back of the book. And you can use that or don't. But I always like that to see who was that and where was she. So it's not providing that much context. I'm Googling a lot while I'm reading it. I'm still very much enjoying it, but I feel the book could have served the audience maybe better if there was more of an, footnote catalog. But maybe that was too expensive or something, and it's just nitpicking anyway. So those are the books that I wanted to talk about in my recent reads on Sunday. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, looking forward to your comments. I'm almost caught up. I think I have like 5 or 6 recent comments still to answer. And I'll talk to you all soon in the next one.